This episode of the program is presented by Novig. Building a program is about establishing a winning culture and finding an edge. That's why we partnered with Novig, the sports-only exchange that gives you a 10 times better chance to win compared to old school sports books. And because it's commission-free, you keep 100% of your winnings. Stop betting against the house. Download Novig and use the code The Program for a match up to $100 on your first purchase.
Some of these young people, they're making more money than their parents. Some of their parents, I think, are living through their children in a really unhealthy way. And I think some of the money is the most money they're ever going to make. So it's all downhill after college. And how is that helpful for a young person to be motivated to continue to work hard, to plan their future? It's crazy. I just think we have to revisit this and bring some sanity back.
Welcome to Tara VanDerveer, the one of the great, not just women's basketball coaches in history, not really just one of the great basketball coaches in history, but one of the great coaches in any team sport that we've ever seen. Three-time national champion at Stanford, five-time national coach of the year, over 1,200 career wins between Stanford. 38 years of those, the final 38 at Stanford, national team coach, an Olympic gold medal, and a teacher in the truest sense of the form now, right, Coach, at Stanford. I was fortunate to get to join your class earlier this season. You're still on the farm. You're still on campus most of the year, but great to have you here on the program.
Pleasure to be here with you. As you said, I am teaching, and I thank you for joining my class. The class was thrilled to have you, and I thank you for that. Outside of coaching, it's been really fun to explore other things.
Tara, when you left in 2024, still elite in college basketball, Sweet 16, 30 wins in your final year, how much of your decision was impacted and how dramatically the landscape had changed with the portal, with NIL, now rev share, or were you just ready? Was it time regardless?
I think it it kind of felt like the perfect storm of, I was thinking about it, and then along comes, it wasn't so much rev share, it wasn't so much the portal, but I think that the breakup of the Pac-12 was what was, I think, really, the combination of all those things. It just the Pac-12 and the absolute craziness of, all the teams traveling from the West Coast, going into the Big Ten, going into the ACC, going into the Big 12. Just the craziness of that was part of it. But I also, I just really wanted to do other things. And I just felt like it, there's a certain comfort in doing the same thing. And I just was ready for a change, maybe in the same way that you wanted a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you think about you said doing the same thing every day, and the calendar had a cycle to you, in season, out of season. You kind of, right? Recruiting, preseason, you kind of know where you can get your window in the summer to get away a little bit, even though, you're still, even when you're away, you've still got to be active in recruiting and,
right.
With your players and your staff, all the things that go into it. But when you look your day to day now, Coach, is there one thing you do miss? And then there is a thing where you go, I've not missed doing that thing one time. Are there a couple of things that you think about like that?
Right. Great question. Well, like you said, you didn't really ever have to think. You knew what you were doing every day. You'd get up, you'd go to the office, go to the gym. You'd have recruiting calls. You'd be watching a game footage, and I said this last night. I watched a movie, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I never watched a movie on a Saturday night. We had a game on Sunday. So I'm like, I'm not used to this much free time, but there was something that was really almost easy about having a routine and having a schedule, and I liked that. And I really like going to the gym. I miss going to the gym, working with the players, I miss practice as much as anything. I still go to the game. So, I go to the games. It's weird going to the game. The first one was really weird when you're not on the bench and you're sitting up in the stands. But one of the hardest things was just trying to figure out, you have like keeping your calendar. Like there's so many things coming at you all the time, and say yes to this or no to that, and wanting to do all these different things, but trying to fit them together in a whole. There was no routine, and I think that was challenging for me.
Coach, certain coaches they fit where they became the head coach, right? Like to me, like John Chaney it was hard to imagine him anywhere but Temple. He fit Temple.
Mm-hmm.
And, we could go, Coach Summit in Tennessee. It was hard to imagine her somewhere else. And then you with Stanford. And I wonder, had you in your mind targeted Stanford? Was it dumb luck? Did it seem obvious to you when they come to recruit you or you apply for the job
Mm-hmm.
for Ohio State? How did it happen?
Well,
And then once you were there, was it
yeah,
obvious?
I was really happy at Ohio State, and I was at Idaho, and I loved Idaho, and then I was at Ohio State, and I loved Ohio State. But then I think the challenge was, um, I don't know, like Stanford was to me the combination of great academics and basketball. And this was before the WNBA. And so I think, especially for women, it's not to say that it wasn't important for men, but, especially for women, the combination of great academics was really appealing. And I was offered, I was offered the job by Andy Geiger. And I actually said no at first because it's a really tough job. And now I think it's even more challenging, with all the new landscape. But when I came to Stanford and I got here, it just felt like home. And, I've really enjoyed being here.
And was there ever one? I'm sure you got calls that were interesting, probably, I would think maybe later in your career. Hey, do you want to come be a president and coach or a president of a WNBA team, other colleges? I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't men's college programs, athletic directors who asked if you might be interested in crossing
Yeah.
over. Was there ever anything that ever gave you a moment of pause in 38 years at Stanford?
Um, there was there's an opportunity, like maybe one time I talked to some other people just a little bit, but it was nothing serious. I think some of it was just to understand maybe what was out there. Is there something that would fit me better? But
Right.
I always felt I always felt Stanford was home. It was just I love the campus. Have you been to campus? Have you seen Stanford?
I have. I covered an NCAA baseball
Yeah.
regional a long time ago in it's the sunken field, right?
Yeah, Sunken Diamond,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
baseball, yeah. I mean, I
Yep.
just the campus is gorgeous, the community is wonderful, the weather is, I love to swim. I swim outside yesterday. I mean, it's just phenomenal. I went to watch beach volleyball. It's 75 degrees. I'm wearing shorts. I mean, I couldn't beat it. So, but I grew up, I grew up in Western New York, and I grew up a fan of the Little Three with Niagara, Canisius, and St. Bonaventure. So we have that connection. I grew up watching Calvin Murphy and driving in snowstorms, and I'm like, I want out of this.
Yeah. I understand the feeling. Coach, I, I'm sure you get so many questions whether it's from somebody's coach at a middle school team, a high school coach, certainly college coaches, regardless of the level, what's the one thing in your mind that a coach has to establish in their environment um, to have a good season, to have a good team? What's the one thing that transcends um, level of play, men's, women's, whatever it is, that was maybe the most important to you, and you think really transcends that to any
Yeah.
basketball team?
Adrian, I think that's an easy question, honestly, for me to answer. Why do we play basketball? It's because it's so much fun. And I think that any coach that takes the joy out of basketball will never be successful. So to me, it's always you want your players, whether you're a third grade coach or the coach of the NBA championship, WNBA championship, you want players to want to love to play the game and make it, and help them reach their goals, help them be successful so that, a lot of times we enjoy things when we're better at it. That if we're a better skier, we're skiing a better, a different slope, or we're, whatever, you're a better golfer, you enjoy improving. And that's our coach's job, is to help people improve, but to keep it fun.
Is that harder to do at the higher levels where there's so much money involved, so much pressure, that it's maybe easier to get away from that?
Well, I think that's the challenge, is not to ever give in to that. That, you have this short time that you're on this earth, and with a team, you're only going to have that circle of players and coaches, for one season, and you want to maximize that, and you want to really enjoy it. And you want people to, our memory is grooved by emotion, and you want the emotion to be so strong that people are like, wow, that was the, best year ever, and that's, I think that's the challenge in it. Pressure is pretty much, I don't know, self-imposed. I know that, we talk about, think about like coaches that are, making millions of dollars, or, great jobs. That's not pressure. Pressure is someone that is really struggling and, can't feed their family, or, can't pay the rent. And so, for coaches, I think their job is to. I always told our team there's going to be someone at the game that's never watched a basketball game or a women's basketball game before. Have them want to come back. Have them have such a great time, and that you show so much respect for the game, so much pride in how you play. That they want to come back and watch.
This episode of the program is presented by Novig. Building a program is about establishing a winning culture and finding an edge. That's why we partnered with Novig, the sports-only exchange that gives you a 10 times better chance to win compared to old school sports books. And because it's commission-free, you keep 100% of your winnings. Stop betting against the house. Download Novig and use the code The Program for a match up to $100 on your first purchase. I wonder if that 96 Olympic team, that group, it was a little bit of an inflection point for women's basketball in the U.S. And you had that team for an extended period together. You traveled the country, you played games. I remember coming to see that group in Colorado Springs. I was working in Fresno then. As much as anything, do you think about that team when you say about, because you could see it with young people, young girls, young boys, basketball fans, that team, it felt like that team helped to really maybe usher in a different era of women's basketball. Do you think about that when you say about, hey, they're watching us, and that group had that, I wouldn't say
Right.
burden, but it had that privilege?
I would say privilege. It was probably one of the most visible teams, basketball teams, ever at the time. And, we traveled all over the country, all over the world. There it was, on television and promoted in a way. The WNBA was kind of testing the waters to see, in fact, is there an appetite for women's pro basketball? And, the enthusiasm that routine was kind of embraced by our country and fans was really special. And I'm really excited that the '96 team is a finalist for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that team. Be shocked that that team's not in Springfield. And the next ceremony in the spring and the fall. That's Lisa Leslie and the group you guys had, Jennifer Azzi. I remember Sarah Corbett, right, wrote a great book following that team around. I remember,
Yeah.
really told, the story of that group. And you're right, it was the precursor to the WNBA, and it no question it paved the way. How different did recruiting become? Did running a college program become once pre WNBA, post WNBA? Did it change how you approached, how you had to approach the job at the very highest level of women's college basketball?
I think I think the WNBA, it's such an elite league of players. So there's not really a lot of players that played, were able to go on to the WNBA. There were quite a few Stanford players that went overseas or played in the WNBA, but I think still women really valued their education. And again, I'm not saying that men don't, but there are probably more guys that think, "Oh, I'm going to be an NBA player," and they're not being realistic, and maybe should have focused on their academics or at least graduate, right? But the WNBA, I think, really inspired a lot of young girls to play basketball in a good way.
You saw the growth, Tara. You were a huge part of it in women's basketball, in the coaching fraternity. That you could, you listen, when you started coaching women's basketball, it wasn't, you know, you, a lot of women's basketball coaches probably had to have another source of income along with coaching. It
Mhm.
probably wasn't enough. Maybe by the time you were at Ohio State, it was, but that changed, right? Money,
Yeah.
the
Well,
investment schools made in the program started to grow. You saw that change
right.
um, through it. What was it like to sort of be at the beginning? You and Coach Summit,
Mhm.
um, you know, you started very differently than you finished. I'm not sure most of the men's coaches could say that.
Well, I think that there's been growth in men's basketball too, and big change in men's basketball. And with television, there's been an explosion of money in men's basketball, which has also then impacted women's basketball. But Adrian, my timing for playing was horrible. Like I didn't have a scholarship. I played at Indiana, but my timing for coaching was pretty good. So as an assistant coach, I was an assistant coach at Ohio State for 2 years. My first year, I got paid nothing. And my second year, and so I worked in the rec facility. But my second year, I got $3,500 to go to graduate school, and that paid for my tuition at Ohio State graduate school. So I got my master's. And my first job at Idaho was $13,000. So that was, enough when rent is like $300 a month. That was enough to live not, not high on the hog, but well. And so, and then from there, the salaries in women's basketball, at a lot of the top schools have really gone up, and in the same way that they have, in men's basketball. But I've never really, honestly, I've never really been, about money. I've always felt that I've been really fortunate, and I've lived in, I've been at great universities with great support. I've always been more, I think, about um, wanting to be somewhere that I felt that I fit, that I felt that this is, where I'm supposed to be. And I loved being at Idaho for the 2 years. And then when I went to Ohio State, I loved being at Ohio State for the 5 years. And then at Stanford, I've just stayed. And, it's, obviously, at Stanford, you do have to be successful because, houses are expensive out here.
Yeah. The relationships that you had with your players and that you've kept with your players, you look
Mhm.
at just the Stanford group and incredibly successful together in college. They've all gone on to do great things. Do you wonder if today's coaches will have that anymore. That it's a big part of what kind of keeps you
Right. I know.
coming back to that job every day. Do you wonder if today's generation of coaches
Well,
will have that with the player movement?
I don't. It's the p I don't worry as much about the coaches as the players, because the
Yeah.
players themselves won't have the relationships with their coach, or they won't have the relationship with their teammates, because if it's so transactional, if it's all about, "I'm gonna be in the portal this year and this year," you're not, where do you go back to? Where is your alma mater?
Yeah.
Where are your
Right.
friends? And, I had a chance to go back to Indiana this fall, and I loved it. It was wonderful being back there for homecoming. And, I felt, a part of that university, and the relationships that I have with, former players, with now, obviously, with, um, the internet and Facebook and all that. But, I get text messages every day from some player. There's, we have a player over in Israel right now, worried about her, or I'll hear, I'll be at the game and I'll talk to this player, or I'll hear about that. I interview different players for class, and the relationships that I have are so special. I would not trade that for all the money in the world.
And you're right. You mentioned the player experience, and eight from 18 to 24 years old, whatever the ranges of our players are now. It probably is much less important. You're probably not thinking a lot about when you have a family someday, when you're older, and you want to bring them back to show them where you played or see the people who are around.
Right.
And you just said it. Do they have a place to go back to? Do you have a place that anybody remembers you were even there? If you were at 3 schools in 4 years, and
And
it's something that probably will hit you. It'll be more important to you in your 30s and 40s and 50s than it will be
yeah.
when you're there. And you're right. And I think that's what uh, may be lost in this. Last thing, Coach, will you look 5, 10 years, however long we want to look down the road? uh, How dramatically different do you think, even from now, this model is going to look? Do you think it's a split? Are we going to have basically the AFC and the NFC of SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and then there'll be just even in basketball, it'll just be a separate division that will play. Do you think we're probably closer to that than maybe we even think?
Well, Adrian, I hope that we can figure this out, and make it more rational than it is right now, because I think not only the coaches, but our fans, our student athletes are really suffering when they they don't have football. I think can do different things because they play once a week, and they charter anyway. They could play AFC, NFC, whatever. They could do that. I think for basketball and all other sports, regional competition is the answer, where we would play on the West Coast. Not to say that we wouldn't play any tournaments or any games with the East Coast, but and St. Bonaventure would play like teams, on the East Coast, and make it and develop. You have those rivalries. Your fans like to see the development of different players. And I think that, as far as the portal, if, I transferred, I went from Albany 1 year to Indiana, but I think, the portal, you have one free transfer, and then after that, you sit out a year. To me, that would be fair for the players, and to bring some sanity back to college athletics, and the you know all the number of like football players that are being sued or suing. It's crazy, and the amount of money. Um, some of these young people, they're making more money than their parents. Their parents are some of their parents, I think, are living through their children in a really unhealthy way. And think some of the money is the most money they're ever going to make. So it's all downhill after college. And how is that helpful for a young person to be motivated to continue to work hard, to, plan their future? It's crazy. I just, I just think we have to revisit this and bring some sanity back.
Yeah, a ton of challenges. I know you'll be somebody, you're a voice that we should be leaning on. One of the voices we should be leaning on for solutions. Coach, great to have you on. Great to be with you. I know you're headed over to the farm today to catch a game. So good luck to the Cardinal, and I know you and I will talk soon.
Adrian, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Coach. Thank you to my guests this week, the legendary Tara VanDerveer. Be sure to catch a new episode of the program every Wednesday.